Welcome to the season 2 premiere of the Tiger Sisters.
Yeah, we're back, baby.
We're back.
We're so back.
We're so back.
It's like we never even left.
Hi, I'm Jean.
And I'm Cherie.
And we're the Tiger Sisters. In this episode, we are going to be talking all about the dynamics and the obligations of immigrant and first-generation children.
So this might be a heavier episode, but like children of immigrants, we're looking at you. This episode is for you guys. We hope you
it's not talked
and,
about that much. So like that's why we thought it was important, even though honestly like it's a more difficult episode for the two of us to do. Like, I would love to hear this dialogue from someone else, from other people.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh my
So it's
God.
like, that's like kind of how we decide our topics and how we're like, you know what, this is not an easy thing to talk about, but like, I wish I could hear other people who I consider to be my peers or look up to and respect, like talk about this topic and how it shaped them and like how they think about it.
It's kind
That's
of
what
like,
we're doing.
Yeah, the discourse, at least to our knowledge, does not yet exist in the way that we're looking for it.
Yeah.
So like we're creating it. It's actually really difficult for us to do that, you know, like emotionally and mentally, but I think it's a worthwhile pursuit. Before we dive in, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Jean and I read every single comment that you guys leave in our YouTube, so please let us know what questions you have.
Yes, we love Mailbag.
Yes, we have a mailbag segment where we read all the questions and comments you guys leave, and we incorporate them into our future episodes.
Yeah, and especially if you guys like certain topics, we'll do a V2 of that episode. Like, we've already gotten some questions about the friendships. We've gotten questions about the friendships episode, so I'm thinking we should do a follow-up on that.
Yeah, and then also dating part 2.
Yeah. Okay, so for our premiere episode, we are bringing back Roses and Thorns. Finally. Oh my God, it's been too long. Okay, so Cherie, tell us about your Roses and Thorns.
Okay, so it's actually like hearkening back to one of our first episodes.
Oh, guys, I think I know what she's gonna say.
Oh yeah, so my Rose, I'm so back, baby. We're
oh
back.
my gosh, she is so popular.
Okay, so
guys,
in the beginning of our season 1, we had a Rose and Thorn, and one of my big thorns was that I was feeling existentially lonely, like profound loneliness, because I had moved to a new city. And I no longer feel that way. It's actually really nice because now I feel like I have my social groove. I'm like meeting people for dinner, for events and all this stuff. And so like I honestly feel the pendulum has swung the other way.
She's so busy. She has dinners every single night of the week. Like nobody does that in LA. Like it's really uncommon. It's not like New York City.
It's kind of like a flurry of like hanging out with people now, and I'm really enjoying it. In fact, I need to like slow down and be like, oh wait, I definitely shouldn't book myself like on Monday and Tuesday because I need a rest. But yeah, I feel like my social battery is very, very full right now.
Yay. And also, not to say I told you so, but I knew it would happen.
Yeah, somehow you knew it would happen. You knew I would bounce back. Although I knew I would bounce back too, but like in the moment I was just feeling like really sad.
Yeah, when you're in it, you're like,
I know.
Like it's hard to imagine like a time that you're not in.
Like I feel like my cups are very full now, like career-wise, like social-wise, and like all the different aspects. I'm like, oh, like I finally feel like I'm settling in a little bit, which leads to my thorn. This is similar to how Jen Tran had someone in her life emerge when she least expected it. Oh. Someone from my past has emerged when I am not...
Dang, she's going there.
When I have not expected it at all. And so while I've really felt very settled in my life here in LA, I was like a little bit nervous because like now I'm kind of like dealing with something, and I'm not going to go into detail about it, but like someone in my past has come up. You know, it's caused a lot of, I think, like... Consternation. Like, I don't know, like a lot of like emotions and like flooding and a lot of like all this other stuff going on. But I think throughout it, like I was like, ugh, this is kind of annoying that this is coming up. Similar to Jen Tran, like you don't expect it. Like Jen Tran on The Bachelorette, you don't expect it. But I'm also just like, life goes on. I have to deal with it. Like my life, I can't put my life on pause to like deal with this thing that's come up from the past. So just like taking it in stride. But like with all my other roses, I was just like, this is kind of like a thorn.
I have comments.
All right, what's your comment?
So I think one thing that I'm proud of you that you did a good job of is that you like talked about it with different trusted friends, including me. And I just felt like when you gave me the feedback that your friends gave you, I like was really able to see that they were like very high quality friends kind of, and that they're like really thoughtful. They're really thoughtful people with good judgment. So like that actually, what?
Because they said similar things that you said.
Yeah. So?
Yeah.
I'm a thoughtful person with good judgment, especially when it's like not yourself, you know? Like when it's yourself, like you
don't see it as clearly.
You can't like see the like scenery or like the landscape when you're inside it. Yes, I guess that's the phrase. Sort of. And it's like your board of advisors situation.
Yeah. I have a board of advisors to go to in terms of like, you know, career, professional stuff, love life, like for different friends for different reasons, and different like trusted advisors in that way. So yeah, we're moving past that. We're moving and grooving. We're getting through it, and we'll see how that goes.
Nice.
Okay, Jean, so what is your rose and thorn?
Okay, my rose and thorn are related. So it's kind of a little bit similar to what you said, but basically my thorn is that like over the last week, I was just really, really like heads down and working a ton. And it was coming off of, I had a cold the week before. So then I was like not really doing anything. And I had to cancel pretty much like a whole week and like weekend of plans. So I was like kind of bummed about that. And then right after that, I was just like working a ton the whole weekend, like barely
to catch up.
Yeah, to catch up, and like barely saw anyone. But like I wanted to work too, you know what I mean? Like I wanted to like get through all this stuff, and I was just like really in the zone, and I felt like I was like in sprint mode. But then I also was just feeling like I don't know, like a lot of it's like in the time period where everyone's kind of like traveling to Europe and like going to a lot of weddings, and like that's the sort of thing that I typically would have been doing and like was doing pretty consistently like when I was with my ex-fiance. And so like it was just Did
you get FOMO?
Not even like FOMO really, but just kind of, it's like when you are like watching like a story where you're like, oh wait, like that is like usually me. That's like the old me. That's like what I would have been doing, but then I'm not doing that anymore. I'm doing something totally different. You know? Like I just have like a very different life. It's like you're watching like the alternate version of like what your life would have been. So like watching all my other friends, they're like doing all these things that I usually would have been doing, but then I'm not doing it. So
yeah.
I don't know. It was just, it's not.
That's a little bit trippy.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's like watching a scene or a movie of like, yeah, like how your life would have been, but it's not now. I guess I'm still processing it because I just said the exact same thing.
Yeah, no, I feel that. I've never been there before. And
zero advice for me, guys.
I have no advice.
This is a one-way street.
I have no advice.
Sad for me.
That just sounds really tough, and I hope you get through it.
Yeah, no, it's not that like bad. It's more just something
you're noticing.
That I'm noticing.
Yeah.
Like, and it's just, I guess it's like a little bit sad still. Like it's just like remnants of like the life that never was. Or more like the life that never will be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess with that specific person, although I feel like that life is very possible with someone else as well.
That's true.
It's not like that won't happen ever.
Yeah, that's true.
It will happen just with someone who is
a different person. Yeah,
exactly. Just
someone else. Yeah. So
wow, who said I didn't have advice? That was pretty smart.
Yeah, it was a little, boilerplate, but that's not a compliment. Boilerplate means like standard.
I know what boilerplate means.
Okay, but you're like acting, she's like acting all like smug as if like that was like a compliment. Okay, so that was the thorn, I guess. I didn't even really realize I was gonna like express it that way. But the rose is that now on the flip side of all of that, it's like all of these different like opportunities have started coming up. And Cherie and I have like a bunch of conferences coming up, which I'm really excited about. And I'm also like speaking at a conference that is like a pretty big deal to me, at least, with like
it's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
It's a big deal. And
Yeah.
I am so excited to brag about Jean about this because
Yeah.
I think we just generally have a hard time bragging about ourselves, but it is so cool. Jean's getting a lot of different speaking opportunities where like companies are flying her out, like very reputable companies flying her out, like posting her up, and she's going to be speaking on panels to like investors and business people who like look up to her and her expertise.
It's a very, I'm really excited because it's like a super qualified audience, and it's like people that run like between them are managing like probably like trillions of dollars, like literally. So I'm just really excited about that. And also I'm like looking back now on like a couple of like really random speaking opportunities that I just like said yes to, and I like had no idea what I was getting myself into, and I just like did it. And now I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I did that, because then I had a chance to kind of like get back into public speaking.
True.
In a more like low stakes way.
Even when you did one when you were very sick.
Oh my God.
But you didn't know. She didn't really know she was that sick.
I know, you know.
If you know what I mean.
So yeah, those are my rose and thorn. So obviously we have mailbag. Mailbag. I want to play the like Blues
Mail
Clues.
time.
Yeah. Okay. So we actually, once again, we have received a lot of questions on the same sort of topic. But generically, they are all pretty much questions. A lot of them are about asking about how we were raised and asking about our childhood. And we've also received questions about what would you do same or different for your future children.
So I think one of the reasons why we've gotten this question so many times, like over and over again in our Instagram videos and our YouTube videos, is because I think on the surface people see something and then they're like really curious to know like how it became. Like on the surface, we are the Tiger Sisters. You know, in our intro video, you see all of the institutions, the like industries behind our background and our credentialing. And so people are just like, how did you get this way? And I get that.
And I'm also, people like your personality, and like they see that we're generally like well-adjusted humans in society.
And so they're like, how were you raised by your parents? And so while I understand that's a very like natural question, Jean and I have honestly gone back and forth on like really how to do this episode. It's a bit tough for us to address, and I think we're really excited to dive in here, but I think just some context setting, it's not something we talk about often. Honestly, like if you've watched me throughout the years on my social media, like I don't really talk about my family. Like now Jean has become such a big part of my Instagram and social media, but like I just usually don't go there.
Yeah. And I've obviously never talked about it publicly because I've never talked about anything publicly before.
She's still beginning to talk about stuff. But yeah, like, you know, I talk about so much stuff on my Instagram, everything, and I share about my life, but I don't really share about this aspect.
Yeah.
Usually I keep it quite private, and so I think in sharing this, you get to learn more about us in a deeper way. And, you know, I think it's also a process for me, just quite honestly, of like, I'm also learning what it means to share this kind of stuff as well. So thank you for being here with us, and thank you for understanding, before we even dive into the context, like where I'm coming from. So setting some context, Jean and I are 7 years apart. We grew up in New York, and I think first things first, we are children of divorce. Our parents were divorced when I was in middle school, and so Jean was in college, but you know, we saw a lot of the pre-divorce stuff before then, and I think the environment that we grew up in was oftentimes very chaotic, and that's probably very much sugarcoating it, and I think I'll just leave it there. And I think throughout all of that, like our parents are immigrants, adding that to the equation.
And I'm an immigrant.
And Jean's an immigrant.
Yeah, I moved to the U.S. when I was 11 months old.
I was born in Brooklyn, New York. Forget about it.
Forget about it.
Forget about it.
Forget about it.
And, you know, soon after then, like, I moved to Long Island, where Jean and I then ended up growing up, and much of our formative years ended up being on Long Island. And I think Jean can also dive into a little bit more of her experience moving as well a little bit later. So just setting some context there, like it was oftentimes very tumultuous, but I think coming out of it, like Jean and I are super close because of, I think, a lot of the stuff that happened in our childhood that was not very nice. And I think throughout it all, like, we grew up mainly, I think, with, like, a very strong single mother, or a person who had to be very strong because of the situations that we were in. And so a lot of our personality, I think, is derived from all the shit that we saw and we did and how we had to adapt and honestly survive in, you know, a child's context of like how to survive through all of that. And so I think I'm just going to leave it there. I think that's like already very heavy. And I think if we feel comfortable later on in this episode or future, we might dive into it. We might not, but that's just some context setting. Is like, you know, how people talk about having a chip on their shoulder. It was just like, oh, I think this is a chip and then some, you know, of us trying to strive and then also making it work. And if you are a child of immigrants, you know that I'm talking to you guys right now, like, you know that there's like so much that comes with it. Like, you know, the family dynamic, you know, parents coming to the United States with like nothing more than like $5 in their pockets. Like, I've heard that story, internalized that story, and it just like, children of immigrants, I think, have a lot of pressure. Yeah,
and like the level of expectations. And I think in many, many cases, a very common story is that the parents give up what is, you know, oftentimes like a very
stable life, perhaps.
Yeah, not just stable, but a lot of times like guaranteed to be upper middle class or even like wealthy lives in their home country in order to come to this new, you know, come to the United States.
They sacrifice opportunity.
Yeah, and like give opportunity to, you know, their children.
So this might be a heavier episode, but like, children of immigrants, we're looking at you. This episode is for you guys. We hope you
it's not talked about that much. So like that's why we thought it was important, even though like honestly like it's a more difficult episode for the two of us to do. It's just like, I would love to hear this dialogue from someone else, from other people.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh my
so it's
God.
like, that's like kind of how we decide our topics and how we're like, you know what, this is not an easy thing to talk about, but like, I wish I could hear other people who I consider to be my peers or look up to and respect, like, talk about this topic and how it shaped them and like how they think about it. So
it's kind
that's
of
what
like,
we're doing.
Yeah, the discourse, at least to our knowledge, does not yet exist in the way that we're looking for it. So like, we're creating it, and it's actually really difficult for us to do that, you know, like emotionally and mentally, but I think it's a worthwhile pursuit.
To kick off this episode, one thing I found to be helpful when it's a more difficult topic for me personally to talk about is find some other voices that have already spoken about it. So I found this one article that was written, the Duke Chronicle, and it's about basically children of immigrants on Gilton Drive. And I'll just read it. Susan Cheminor, class of 2027, says, "When I study for a test, I'm not simply being a good student. I'm making good on a promise that I won't let the sacrifices of the people who came before me go to waste."
That's heavy. That's like really heavy shit.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like such a good encapsulation of like every single thing, like the way that you kind of walk through life as a child of immigrant, right? It feels like everything you're doing is like not just for you, but it feels like it's for your parents, your grandparents,
your great-grandparents,
like, your ancestors. Like, you know, the history of like trauma that they went through.
Yeah.
Right?
And I mean, at least we know the history of our family trauma.
Yeah. And like, it's kind of, it's not that healthy, but like, I feel like what's ingrained in you as a child is like, your level of trauma, like whatever it is never going to compare, which is true, right? Like, we've never been like victims of war, right?
That's true.
We've never had to contend with like
starvation.
Yeah, like, you know, droughts or starvation. And this is just true across like so many minority like friends that I've spoken to.
I don't really know what to do with that mindset.
I know, because it is a hard way to go through life. Like,
It
you just
is.
put a lot of pressure.
You put a lot of pressure on yourself,
yourself.
and you're like, oh, I'm not going through war or starvation. Like, my life is fine. But then, like, I also don't think that's, like, a really, like, feasible way to think about life when things actually do matter. Like,
I know.
when
Like, the
when you have-
unhealthy way to think about
Yeah.
it that I think I have in the past has been like, oh, like, I didn't have to deal with, like, starvation, war, or, like, you know, child labor, and I still can't get into Yale. Like, that's like the most toxic way that, honestly, I did think of. That was, like, my way of thinking for a long
Bro.
time.
Well, I'm glad you moved past that, because I feel like for mental health reasons, like,
Yeah.
it's not the best to have that mindset. But, like, I
Yeah.
do hear where that's coming from. Like, just going back to this quote, it's just like, I mean, also the generations before us, like, people who are in their, like, 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s, like, they've had things were not easy. Things are still not easy today.
Yeah.
But, like, for our, like, great-grandparents, like, oh my God.
Yeah, I think there's also, like, very much across many immigrant cultures, this idea of, like, hard work.
Yeah.
And
Sacrifice.
And, like, because so many of our predecessors, their achievements are due to hard work, they kind of see that as, like, I don't know, like, panacea, or how do you pronounce it? Panacea, right?
Panacea.
They see that as the sort of, like, panacea in some ways, or at the very least, like, the basis of everything, right? But also at the same time, hard work is not all you need. And that's something that I feel like a lot of immigrant parents, like, don't really, because they don't have that context of, like, what it's like to, like, grow up and live and try to thrive in, like, this new social structure.
Yeah.
The new social structure of being in a different country. So, like, it's not like you can't just, like, hammer your way and, like, hard work your way through everything.
Yeah. I think
A lot of things are out of your control, honestly.
Well,
And
I think
that's,
it's a good starting point.
It's a good starting point, but it's, like, I feel like it's, like, ingrained in you so much that, like, it eventually becomes a limiting
discipline.
belief, because you think that you can kind of do anything or get anywhere with hard work, and you assume that the world is a meritocracy in some ways, because it is when you're in school in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah,
'Cause
for the most
literally
part.
grades, like tests, grades.
That's so interesting. Yeah, it's because, like, it also, I think it depends on the industry, but, like, a lot of industries are more regimented that way, where it is a meritocracy. For example, like, being a doctor, for the most part, like, getting into med school, like, it's your grades that matter.
It actually makes so much sense now why, like, immigrant families push their daughters or push their children to be doctors and lawyers, because literally, like, getting into a good law school all goes or engineers. Like, getting into a good law school all comes down to your LSAT and your grades.
Very much. There's less, like, exogenous factors.
Yeah.
They're all, for the most part, it's, like, more within your control. Like, the harder that you study, and the higher the grade.
Wow,
like,
I can't
that's
believe I
within
never
your
thought of
control.
that.
Yeah, whereas,
That's
like,
such a good correlation.
it really is. And, like, because I think that's what a lot of immigrant families know to be true in their home countries, and in the US, if they can replicate that in these specific domains, they can also see and find similar success.
Yeah, versus, like, if you think about a lot of the other industries, like, even the ones that we've been in, like finance, technology, media, a lot of it is not just about working hard, but it's about having an edge, right? And having an edge comes through information. How do you get information? Interpersonal relations, right? It's not just, like, you can't just hard work your way to, like, information in those industries.
Something I would like to come back to that I've been thinking about is the stories that we tell. We were saying we've heard the stories of, like, sacrifice about our great-grandfather, and like, those are the stories that are told from generation to generation. It has a theme of sacrifice, of loss, of hard work, and duty. And those are the narratives that I think are passed down in many immigrant families, especially Asian ones. And I find that to be quite sad, because I haven't heard stories that are told about, like, love and laughter and fun times. And it makes me believe, maybe incorrectly, maybe correctly, that those were not present in our family ever. Like, maybe they did have a laugh at the dinner table, but
That's tough.
Those are never the stories that are told in our immigrant family, dynamic. And I hate that. But, like, I don't really know what to do with that. I would like to change it going forward. But so much of the stories we tell ourselves and that we hear dictate how we feel about our family history.
I do think some of that is cultural, because I feel like, I don't know, it's like a spectrum, right? Like, do your stories that you tell and pass down, like, do they tend to be more positive, or do they tend to be more like kind of like negative coded, you know?
Yeah. The thing is, like, you know, I don't know. It's a story about resilience and grit. So that's the positive side
Yes,
of it.
exactly. That's what I was going to say, is that on the flip side, it makes you, sorry I cut you off, but like it makes you work harder, right? Like, even though we haven't gone through those hardships ourselves,
Yeah.
like hearing those stories like make us almost like act in a way as if we did.
Perhaps, but is it out of like internal positive motivation, or is it from this quote, the guilt and the duty that comes out of it? Like, what is the motivator?
Does it matter?
I would say for our mental health, it probably does. I think the distinction probably matters.
Yeah.
Maybe for the end result, it doesn't.
But then maybe without those stories, like we never, I mean, I'm sure without those stories, like, and that background and like that sort of pressure that we had taken on, we never would have pushed ourselves to do all the things that we do. Even like now, like it, maybe like on the surface, it looks like we're just like making a podcast day to day, but like we have
a grind.
like, no, it's not just a grind, but like we have like huge ambitions for this, like massive. I'm just gonna put it out there.
Yeah,
like
really big.
Like truly,
Walt
like
Disney,
world.
we're coming for you.
No, truly though, like we want to like change the world with what we're doing.
It's kind of beautiful in that way.
Yeah.
Come from a harder, rougher place, but I think it's grown into something beautiful, which I really love. But then I think another question is just like, if you don't grow up in these circumstances, like, do you have that same edge?
Yeah. I would love to know, like, this is where, like, I'm going to ask you guys, like, please chime in, like, please comment. Like, I want to know.
Like, if you don't have that chip on your shoulder in this way, do you need a different chip on your shoulder to, like, have, I mean, sometimes, I mean, this is, I'll just put it out there. Some people are like, people who have everything handed to them in life, like, don't have enough drive. And that's why as a parent, I'm not going to give my kids, you know, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Like, but, you know, that's a different chip on your shoulder that you won't be ever good enough or you won't measure up. But like,
yes. And then you want to prove yourself that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a discussion. Please have the discussion in the comments, because we would love to hear your thoughts.
Or like, even if you do like 100% identify with us, or you're like, oh, well, I agree with like this part that you're saying, but not this part. Like, I want to know, like, I want it to be a dialogue.
Yeah.
I'm like genuinely curious. I want to know what you guys have to say and how you think.
I feel like we should have another person on this podcast.
Who?
I don't know. Just like a third voice.
Yeah. I do think that's a good idea. Like, we could basically like
maybe
have this same we could like have this same conversation, but having like a third perspective would be really interesting. Like someone who's like outside of our family, basically.
Yeah. Totally.
I'll just share another quote that really stood out to me in that same Duke Chronicle article. And it goes, through the lens of immigrant guilt, to be productive means to toil, to suffer, and to drown in Google Calendar appointments. That one just like really hit home for me, because I'm like freaking obsessed with my Google Calendar, and it's like every single minute of the day is like mapped out. And I'm like, holy, it's like when you read something, you're like, oh my God, like how do they know me? Like, you know? So it's like it's like just you feel so seen. You're like, oh, it's universal. It's not just me. Like, this other person has like so perfectly elucidated the way that I feel.
Yeah. I don't like that quote. I'm glad it spoke to you, but obviously,
why don't you like it?
I just don't. It's just so unhealthy in my mind.
Oh, I agree.
To put a label on it, but I'm just like, in this day and age, like, I can see why that's a thing, but I like don't like it at all.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying it's healthy. I think it's just like, it's like a means of like coping, I guess, or something like that. But you're just like, oh, like someone else is that way too.
Yeah, I hear you.
You cut me off.
Just don't like it.
I think another really common theme of immigrants and children of immigrants is just guilt, right? Like, we kind of like touched upon it, but we didn't really put a label.
It's such a powerful emotion.
Yeah. And there's this really amazing article that was in the Washington Post that was called "But What Will People Say?" And the author says how As the first in my family to be born in the West, I've always had to navigate my feelings of guilt and have painful and difficult conversations with my immigrant parents about the choices I am making that are different from their expectations. And the guilt can be because of constant adaptation between two cultural influences, a phenomenon known as bicultural straddling. That was also helpful for me because I've never heard a phrase like being put to our state of being.
Yeah, I've heard of like intersectionality, but I think that's like very broad.
Yeah.
Bicultural straddling.
Bicultural straddling.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's what I've experienced my entire life.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, going to school, like a mostly white neighborhood, and, you know, doing all the things at school, join all the clubs and being like very American, like standardly American, and then going home and like really enjoying like, I don't know, fried rice. This is like kind of a dumb explanation, but like...
And she said stinky tofu. She said, I had to go to school with stinky tofu in my lunchbox.
Yeah, I don't know though. But
No,
then
she didn't.
It's kind of like, that's just like one dumb example, but it was very much bicultural straddling.
Yeah.
Or even just like another example is just like my friends from school are friends with their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
And their parents' friends.
And their parents' friends.
And they're not afraid of them.
Right.
They're like not afraid to like talk to them.
Yeah. Which, you know, like I can understand. Like, so, but like I would say in many like immigrant households, it's just like a very much parent and child and obedience dynamic.
Yes.
And not like a friendship.
It's like the literal definition of like in engineering when it's like parent-child relationship.
Seriously.
One thing I've noticed now that I'm reflecting on it is that I'm only 7 years older than you, but even in that like age gap, like I see a lot of things where like for me, I feel like my path that I chose was like much more by the book. So for example, working in finance, even that was like a little bit outside of the norm because that's not like a line of work that is like the typical like 3 accepted, you know, jobs of being an engineer, a lawyer, or a doctor. So like even kind of like explaining that a little bit to my mom and like being like, no, I'm making the right choice. Like I know what I'm doing. Like this is what I've learned at school and this is a like very viable career path for me. So like even doing that was a bit of a stretch. Then she was like fully bought in to like Goldman Sachs and then having the conversation be like, actually I'm leaving finance, I'm leaving Goldman Sachs, I'm leaving like the steady paycheck and the bonus behind and I'm going to be working at a company that is like barely a public company that builds social mobile games. And she's like, you're going to build like phone games? Like that was like, again, I had to then do the labor of like explaining all of that and like pushing against, you know, even just to like live your life kind of and to do these jobs. But then you on the other end.
But I also feel like before we dive into like my context, like at that point you were like 25. But I also feel like there's this thing in like immigrant families too, is that, and especially ours because we're super small and like very tight knit in that way, is that like we feel a lot of responsibility to like explain our decisions or potentially like over explain our decisions when it's really our life. I feel like the very like American like independent like mindset would be like, I'm going to be doing this, like I'm gonna do it and you're not gonna stop me.
Yes.
That's like a very American way of thinking, but because of this bicultural straddling, we still, and the guilt and also, you know, the sacrifice that our families made, like we still feel a very like large need to explain our decisions when in fact we were adults then and adults now. But
well,
like,
it's a very well studied phenomenon. It's the idea of like coming from a culture that is more communal oriented, like communal decision making versus individualistic decision making. The USA is like the most individualistic. Token, exactly, the most individualist like oriented
personal country. Human rights. Wait, I probably shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that. The US is the most individualistic.
Yeah.
Identity.
The most individualistic, the most capitalistic, like for better or worse. I mean,
yeah, which is where the bicultural straddling comes from.
Yes. Yeah, because like you feel like with your choices, like for my job, like it's not just a choice for me, right? It's a choice that is like not paying back, but like it's a choice that everyone needs to be bought in on, because the only way you've gotten to where you've gotten in life is because everybody has invested so much in you.
Oh my God.
It's true. That's a good way of like explaining it, right?
It is.
That's why like every single decision is so imbued with like 100 years of like people doing things for you.
That's so much pressure. That's literally so much pressure to put on ourselves.
I've never said that out loud. I've never like said things.
I don't love that.
Said it that way. But it is like, it's verbalizing. I know, but it is kind of verbalizing how I felt.
Yeah.
And probably how you felt in some ways.
Yeah. Although I feel it less so now as like an almost 30-year-old, where I'm like, you've raised me to make these decisions. You, as in our family, have raised me to make these decisions. And at some point, you have to trust me that you've raised me in the right way to make the right decisions for myself.
I feel it less so now for a different reason. I feel it less so now because I am financially independent. And to quote Tinks, I like saw like a clip from her, one of her podcasts. She said she called herself borderline wealthy. I kind of like that. I'm fully financially independent now, and that's why like I can like fund this investment period into ourselves, right? Where we're starting our own company, we're bootstrapping it, we are funding everything on our own. But that's the only reason why, is because I've gone through, at this point, 15 years. I have 15 years of experience working in finance, working in technology, and like really optimizing for success and financial independence.
Do you want to talk about me or no?
Oh, about you?
Yeah.
Right. Well, the point I was going to make is that like right out of undergrad, you worked for LinkedIn.
Yeah. But before then, don't forget, I very much wanted to be a doctor in college. Yeah. Like that was the more traditional route that I was going.
Then she had to slice the mice brains.
And then I worked at a neuroscience research lab at Mount Sinai, and I was secluded for many hours a day in a dark room imaging mice brains that I sliced. Yes.
Yeah.
And I was like, this research life is not for me.
Yeah.
But I was going to go down a very traditional path.
I'm still obsessed with the fact that you had that internship. Like she was like literally like 19 and she was like working at Mount Sinai. I don't know. There's just so many things. I'm like so proud of you. It was really
cool. I love my little badge. I was so proud
of you.
Yeah. It was an amazing. It's a beautiful.
And you wore flats.
Yes, I did. I wore skinny jeans and flats. And
like a button-up shirt.
Yeah, and a J. Crew button-up.
Yeah.
I felt very adult.
Yeah, she was so professional. Mm-hmm. But I guess you did do like a lot of, you worked at Morgan Stanley in college too. Mm-hmm.
Our mom recognized that name.
Yeah.
I think going to LinkedIn was a bit of a stretch because it's not like a Google or like a Meta, but I mean, it wasn't that big of a stretch. I had studied computer science, so I think our mom felt very comfortable with that degree, or that type of degree, so that I would be very employable.
Because it's basically adjacent to / is computer engineering.
Yeah.
So she's like, it's an engineering degree.
Yeah.
I feel like that's one of the things that mom is still like the most proud of you for.
Really?
That you're an engineer. She brings it up all the time. Right?
She does, in the most random
ways.
Like
Cherie will do like one random...
I'll hang up a picture frame.
And our mom will be like, oh, it's because you're an engineer. She'll be like, my little engineer.
I'll do something like that's a little bit related. Actually, not even like I'll do something like hardware related, you know?
That's like kind of technical.
I'll fix the printer and she'll be like, you're such an engineer.
I know. And then when I fix the printer, I get nothing. I should be getting more credit because I'm not an engineer.
You should take that up.
I'm a self-taught engineer.
You should take that up with her. So I think this was already a very meaty episode where we kind of just like broke down like what it means to be the children of immigrants. What are some of the like implications, the mindset, the mental health, the guilt, the feelings behind all of it.
We talk so much. Like I'm surprised by how much I had to say.
Really? I knew this was going to be a good episode. I knew it was going to be tough. Like this is not an easy thing to talk about. So I do think this warrants a part 2 because we do want to dive into like obligations of being a good daughter, eldest daughter syndrome,
and
like what it really means to be like an immigrant like an eldest immigrant child and then maybe a younger immigrant child, and what are the dynamics there. Let us know if that's something you guys want us to talk about or want us to see, because I think this was already a very meaty episode and it deserves its own episode.
Yeah, and I'm ready to talk about those things if you guys are.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of the Tiger Sisters.
Thanks for being here. I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say. I really want it to be a dialogue with all of us, with our community. Like, comment, and subscribe, especially this episode. Comment. I want to know what you're thinking.
And if you found this episode helpful, we would really appreciate it if you can send it to someone who might like it.
Yeah, do it. And also rate us 5 stars.
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
All right, see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.